The night air was heavy with dust and smoke. Torches burned along the walls of the arena, their flames shaking in the wind. The crowd pressed against the iron railings, shouting and screaming, hungry for blood. At the center of the arena stood a cage, thick iron bars glowing faintly from the heat of the fires. Inside the cage, chained to the floor, was the alien beast. The beast's body was massive, taller than 3 men standing together. Its skin was dark, rough, and covered in scars, old wounds that told a story of battles and cruelty. Sharp tusks curved from its mouth, and glowing eyes stared through the bars. The people whispered that those eyes were the eyes of a killer, eyes that had seen countless deaths. But Daniel, standing in the crowd, saw something different. Daniel was not a soldier, not a hunter, not even a man of wealth. He was only a traveler, a human who had come to this settlement searching for work and shelter. He had heard about the alien beast the moment he arrived. Stories spread quickly. A monster captured from the wastelands, a danger to all life, a creature that must die. Yet as Daniel looked at the cage now, he did not see a monster. He saw a prisoner. The guards stood close to the cage, their spears pointed, their armor shining. One guard spat at the beast, and the crowd roared with laughter. Another threw a stone that struck the beast's side. The creature did not roar, did not fight. It only lowered its head and made a low sound. It was a sound Daniel would never forget, a sound not of rage but of sorrow. A horn blew, deep and harsh, silencing the crowd. From the high balcony, the executioner stepped forward. In his hands was a weapon, sharp and heavy, meant to end the beast's life in a single strike. The crowd cheered again, stomping their feet, chanting for blood. The executioner raised his arm, and all eyes fixed on the cage. Daniel's chest tightened, his heart pounded, and his throat felt dry. Something inside him screamed to let it happen, to stay silent, to be like everyone else. But another voice inside him was louder, a voice that told him this was wrong. He saw the beast's glowing eyes again, not filled with hate, but with fear. And in that moment, he knew. The creature was not dangerous by choice, it was broken by pain. Daniel stepped forward, pushing through the crowd. Voices shouted at him, hands tried to pull him back, but he did not stop. He reached the edge of the arena, standing between the cage and the crowd. His voice shook as he shouted, "Stop this, don't kill it." The crowd gasped. Silence fell for a heartbeat. Then laughter followed. "Fool!" someone shouted. "The monster will kill us all." Another voice yelled, "Throw him in with the beast." But Daniel stood firm, his fists clenched, his legs shaking but unmovable. He looked at the executioner and repeated, "Don't kill it, please." The beast lifted its head slowly, its glowing eyes locked onto Daniel. For the first time, it made no sound, no growl, no cry. It simply stared, as if trying to understand why this small human was standing in its defense. The crowd continued to jeer, but Daniel no longer heard them. All he could feel was the weight of those eyes staring back at him. The executioner lowered his weapon for a moment, frowning at the interruption. The guards looked at each other, unsure if they should drag Daniel away or let him speak. One of them snarled, "Human, this is no place for kindness, this is justice." But Daniel shook his head, his voice breaking as he said, "Justice is not killing something that has already suffered enough." Murmurs spread among the crowd, confusion mixing with anger. No one had ever spoken in defense of the beast. Before, the people had been taught that it was only evil, that it could never be trusted. Yet here was one human, trembling but unbroken, standing between death and mercy. The beast's chains rattled softly as it shifted, watching every movement. The horn sounded again, louder this time, calling the guards to act. The executioner lifted his weapon once more, but his eyes flicked toward Daniel. The human's defiance had unsettled him, broken the rhythm of the ceremony. The crowd shouted louder, demanding blood, demanding death. But Daniel did not move. His heart raced as he whispered, almost to himself, "It's not a monster." And though his words were nearly lost in the chaos, the beast seemed to hear. Its eyes softened, just for a second, a flicker of something deeper, something human. Daniel knew he had done something dangerous, perhaps even foolish, but in his chest, he felt no regret, only the beginning of a bond he did not yet understand. That night the cage was no longer just a prison for the beast. It was also the place where a human's choice sparked the first spark of trust. And in the darkness of the arena, as the crowd demanded death, Daniel felt a quiet truth. This was only the beginning. The crowd didn't forget. After that night in the arena, whispers followed Daniel everywhere he went. Some called him brave, most called him insane. Children pointed at him from behind fences, and shopkeepers refused to serve him food. To the people of the town, he wasn't a hero. He was a fool who dared to defend a monster. But Daniel didn't care about the names they gave him. All he could think about were those glowing eyes, the quiet pain behind them. He couldn't sleep that night, not because of fear, but because of questions. What had they done to that creature before it was dragged into the cage? Who decided it was dangerous without even listening to its story? By morning, he made up his mind. He walked straight to the arena again, even though the guards glared at him. They didn't stop him this time. Maybe because they thought he was harmless. Maybe because no one had ever cared this much about a beast before. Daniel stood in front of the cage again, this time alone. The beast sat still, its large body resting on the cold stone, chains wrapped around its arms and legs, its head lowered. Daniel spoke softly. "You don't deserve this." The creature looked up, slowly, blinking like it was waking from a deep sleep. He reached into his bag and pulled out a loaf of bread, torn and old but better than nothing. The guards laughed from a distance, calling out, "Feeding your pet again, human." Daniel ignored them and slid the bread through the bars. The beast didn't move for a moment, unsure. Then slowly, carefully, it leaned forward and took the bread in its jaws without growling. Daniel watched it chew slowly, almost like it was trying to remember what kindness felt like. "I don't know what they did to you," Daniel whispered, "but I'm sorry." The beast made a low sound, not a growl, not a roar, something softer. It didn't speak, but Daniel felt like it understood. A strange silence grew between them, a silence filled with more meaning than 100 words. It was the beginning of something, even if neither of them knew what yet. Over the next few days, Daniel came back again and again. He brought bits of food, water, and sometimes just sat near the bars. He started calling the beast Bray, a name that meant nothing and everything. Bray never attacked, never roared, never acted wild. Instead, it watched Daniel like it was learning from him. One evening, while Daniel sat outside the cage, a group of soldiers walked up. Their leader, a broad-shouldered man with sharp eyes, stepped forward. "You're wasting your time," he said. "That thing killed 5 of our best scouts." Daniel looked up, calm but firm. "Did you see it happen?" The man frowned. "Of course not, but the bodies were found near the crater and the beast was captured close by." "That's not proof," Daniel replied. "That's fear." The guard laughed. "Fear keeps us alive, human, and your little act of compassion is going to get people killed." Daniel stood up, brushing the dirt off his hands. "Or maybe it'll save someone." The two stared at each other, and the moment was thick with tension, but the guard turned and walked away, shaking his head. Later that night, Daniel sneaked back into the arena with a lantern. He crouched by the cage and whispered, "Bray, I think they'll kill you soon." The beast didn't move, but its glowing eyes stayed on him. Daniel sighed. "I don't know what I can do yet, but I promise I won't let them end your life without a fight." The chains around Bray's wrists clinked softly as it shifted closer to the bars. Daniel reached out his hand slowly, careful not to seem threatening. For a long moment, the beast didn't move. Then it leaned forward and touched his hand lightly with its snout. The contact was brief, but powerful. Like an invisible line had been crossed, it was no longer a man and a monster, but something more. A beginning of trust. The next morning, posters were nailed around town. Execution rescheduled. Alien beast to be put down in 3 days. Daniel stood in the market square, staring at the paper, fists clenched. They were going to do it, with or without the crowd. He had to act fast. Back at the cage, the beast watched him come in, its eyes alert. Daniel whispered, 3 days. He didn't need to say more. Bray stood slowly, chains clinking, as if it understood the meaning behind the human's voice. The beast wasn't just an animal, it was thinking, listening, remembering. Daniel placed his hand on the bars, his voice low. "We're going to get out of here." The beast stepped forward, eyes glowing softly in the fading light. The human's defiance had started as a whisper, a small act of kindness. But now, it was turning into something stronger, something neither man nor beast could do alone. And in the shadow of the arena, as the fires burned low, a silent promise was made. Daniel would not let fear win. The skies were gray the next morning. Clouds hung low like a heavy blanket over the town. Daniel stood near the cage again, arms crossed, eyes tired but determined. The execution was now only 2 days away. He knew time was running out. Bray sat, silently inside the cage, its large body barely moved, but its glowing eyes never left Daniel. The townspeople still threw insults when they passed by. Some called Daniel a traitor, others simply whispered and shook their heads. But none of that mattered to him anymore. Each day since his first visit, he had returned to Bray with food and water, and each time the beast grew calmer, quieter. There were no more growls, no sudden movements, only silence and stillness. A strange peace began to settle between them. That morning, Daniel brought a blanket with him. It wasn't much, just something old he'd found in an abandoned supply crate. He folded it and carefully slid it under the bars. Bray sniffed it, then gently dragged it closer with its claws. It lay down on it like a tired, forgotten animal. Daniel sat outside the cage, resting his back against the bars. "I don't know what they did to you," he said quietly, "but I believe you were once free." The beast didn't reply, of course, but its head turned slightly as if listening. Daniel continued, "You didn't choose to be here, did you?" Bray blinked slowly, then lowered its head on its paws. Later that afternoon, an old man approached. He was thin, with silver hair and a long coat that brushed the ground. He stopped a few feet from Daniel, eyes scanning the cage. "You speak to it like it understands," the man said. Daniel looked up. "Maybe it does." The old man nodded. "I was there when they brought it in." He paused, voice quiet. "It wasn't attacking anything when the scouts found it. It was just sitting near a stream, drinking." Daniel's breath caught. Then, "Why say it killed the scouts?" The man shrugged. "Fear is easy to sell when people are hungry for someone to blame." Then he turned and walked away, leaving only silence behind. That night, Daniel returned again, this time with a small oil lamp. He lit it near the cage and sat down, his face lit by the soft orange glow. Bray moved closer to the bars. Quietly watching, Daniel smiled. "You're not like them. You don't growl unless you're hurt." The beast tilted its head slightly as if thinking. He reached into his satchel and pulled out a sketch pad. On the page was a simple drawing. A big figure, Bray, standing beside a smaller one himself. Bray stepped closer, its glowing eyes blinking with curiosity. Daniel held it up, laughing softly. "Yeah, I'm not an artist." But something strange happened. Bray reached a single claw out and gently tapped the drawing. Daniel froze, watching the movement. It wasn't random, it wasn't wild, it was thoughtful, a small but powerful sign. He whispered, "You remember who you were, don't you?" From that moment, everything felt different. Daniel no longer just fed the beast. He talked to it. He shared stories, memories of Earth, of forests, of quiet lakes, of music. Bray would sit still for hours, listening, blinking slowly. It was like talking to an old soul trapped in a cage. One night, while Daniel rested beside the cage, he heard a low humming sound. He sat up, confused, looking around. Then he realized it was coming from Bray. A low, deep hum like a memory of a forgotten song. Not a growl, not a threat, but something peaceful. Daniel leaned closer, smiling. "You're trying to talk to me?" he whispered. Bray hummed again, the sound vibrating through the bars. It wasn't words, but it was something. And to Daniel, it was enough. The next day, one of the younger guards walked past and saw them. He frowned, watching the strange moment between human and beast. Later, he told the others what he saw. "Maybe it's not just an animal," he said quietly. But his words were ignored. Daniel began studying the cage itself. He traced the bolts, the chains, the hinges. He knew he'd need tools and perfect timing. But more than that, he needed Bray to trust him completely. They would only have one chance. At sunset, Daniel came to the cage again, this time with bruises on his arm. He had gotten into a fight at the food market. Someone threw a bottle at him for defending Bray. He sat quietly, not speaking. Bray moved forward and pressed its snout gently against the bars. Daniel smiled weakly. "I'm okay. Don't worry." That night, as the stars appeared, Bray did something it had never done before. It sat tall and let out a low, deep cry. Not of pain, not of rage, but of memory. The sound echoed across the silent arena like a song from another world. Daniel listened, his heart aching. He understood now. This creature had once sung under different stars, and now it sang, for freedom again. In the silence that followed, Daniel whispered, "I'm going to get you out, I swear it." And the beast lowered its head in quiet agreement. The bond was no longer silent, it had become a promise. The arena slept during the day, but at night it whispered. Wind moved through the stone walls, carrying old smells, blood, dust, oil, and fear. Daniel crouched behind a pile of broken crates, watching the guards take their evening break. It had become a pattern. Every night at the same time, the men would light their pipes and laugh loudly near the west gate. They didn't know that Daniel had been watching them for days. Bray was awake too. Inside the cage, the beast didn't sleep like it once did. It stayed alert, eyes glowing faintly in the dark, waiting. It had sensed something had changed, not just in Daniel, but in itself. For the first time in a long time, it had hope. Daniel waited until the last torch near. The cages burned out, then he crept along the wall, his hands trembling as he reached for the rusted lockbox near the gate. Inside it were spare keys, old and forgotten, but Daniel had seen one guard use a smaller one for cage maintenance. He found it, thin, silver, cold to the touch. He slipped it into his coat and whispered, "Tonight we test it." He moved to Bray's cage, careful to stay in the shadows. Bray rose slowly, sensing his presence even before he arrived. The beast didn't growl or shift, it simply waited. Daniel knelt and pulled the blanket tighter around himself as he reached for the lower part of the lock. "I don't know if this will work," he murmured, "but we have to try." The key slid in, rusty and stiff. Daniel turned it once, twice. It clicked. He pulled back, shocked it had actually opened. But he didn't push the door. Not yet. This was only a test. Bray looked at him, its breathing calm but heavy. Daniel placed a finger to his lips and whispered, "Not tonight, just soon." He locked it again and slipped away before the guards returned. The wind picked up, carrying dust through the arena, and Bray lowered itself back onto the blanket, eyes never leaving the path Daniel had taken. The next day, Daniel visited during the early morning hours. He brought a canteen of clean water and a small pouch of salt jerky. Bray took the food gently, chewing with slow, careful movements. Daniel sat near the cage and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He opened it and laid it flat against the bars. It was a map, hand-drawn with charcoal. "The east wall is old," he whispered, pointing at a corner. "If we break through there, we'll reach the tunnels." Bray stared at the paper, its eyes blinking once, then twice. Daniel laughed softly. "Yeah, I know, it's messy, but we don't have time for perfect." Later, after the sun dipped behind the hills, Daniel went to speak with someone he once trusted. Sarah, a mechanic who worked near the loading docks. She had helped him fix a transport cart weeks ago, and she owed him a favor. He found her polishing metal tools by the firelight. "I need something that can cut chains," he said, voice low. She raised an eyebrow. "What kind of chains?" He hesitated, then said, "Arena chains." Her face went pale. "You're talking about the beast." Daniel didn't deny it. "It's not what they say it is." Sarah looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You're lucky I don't report you, but I'll give you something. Once. That night she gave him a heat blade small enough to fit under his coat. Press it to metal. Wait. 10 seconds and pull back, she warned. But it only works 3 times. Daniel thanked her and left without saying another word. The blade hummed softly as he held it in his hand later that night. It felt like holding lightning. He returned to the cage once the guards fell asleep. Bray stepped forward, watching closely. Daniel crouched low and pressed the heat blade against the lower chain. A soft sizzle filled the air. Metal hissed and glowed red. 10 seconds later, the first chain snapped. Daniel exhaled slowly, eyes wide with shock. It works, he whispered. He quickly hid the tool again and motioned for Bray to step back. I'll finish the rest tomorrow night, we're almost there. Bray let out a low hum, almost like a purr. But someone was watching, high on the tower wall. A figure stood in the dark, cloak wrapped tightly around their shoulders. They had seen the light from the heat blade. They had seen Daniel's hands working on the cage, and they turned quietly, slipping away into the shadows without a sound. The next morning, posters went up again. Arena closed to public, security upgraded. Daniel felt his heart sink as he read the words. They knew something, or at least suspected. He hurried to the cage and found 2 extra guards posted nearby. Bray stood still, calm as if nothing had changed. Daniel whispered through clenched teeth, "We have to move fast now." He had 1 chain left to cut, 1 escape path, 1 chance. He stared at Bray for a long moment. "I hope you're ready," he said. The beast gave a slow nod, a gesture more human than anyone watching would have believed. And as night fell again, deeper and darker than before, the arena waited for what would come. Next, not with cheers, not with fire, but with silence, the kind that comes just before a storm. The wind howled across the arena walls that night. It was colder than usual, and the sky above was dark with clouds. Daniel moved quickly through the alleyways. His hood pulled low over his face. Each footstep felt louder than it should have, echoing against stone and silence. He knew this night had to be the one. Too many guards had been added. Too many eyes had started watching the cage. Someone had seen him use the heat blade, he was sure of it. They hadn't stopped him yet, but they would soon. Time had run out. Tucked under his coat was the heat blade. Warm and humming faintly, he had 1 last charge left. Just 1. It had to be enough to cut Bray's final chain. He had also brought 2 smoke capsules he stole from an abandoned mining shed. Not dangerous, but enough to cause panic and confusion as he reached the edge of the arena. He slowed. The guards were still there, 2 of them seated near a barrel fire, talking softly. He couldn't get too close without drawing attention. Instead, he crouched low and waited for his moment. The wind picked up again, tossing dust into the firelight. A distant crash sounded from the market road. Sarah's distraction. Right on time. 1 guard stood, gripping his weapon. What was that? The other followed him, and both jogged off. Into the darkness, Daniel whispered, "Thank you, Sarah," and slipped through the outer gate. Inside the arena, everything felt quiet. Too quiet. Even the torches burned lower than usual. Bray was already standing, the broken chains on 1 leg hanging loose. Its glowing eyes met Daniel's as he approached. "No turning back," Daniel said softly. He knelt by the final chain and pulled. The heat blade free, he pressed it against the metal, watching it glow red. Bray didn't move, didn't flinch, only watched. 10 seconds passed and the last chain snapped with a soft crack. Daniel pulled the tool back just as it powered down for good. The beast was free, but the cage door was still locked. Daniel pulled out the small, silver key he had taken days ago. His hands trembled as he slid it into the lock. Click. The cage door creaked open slowly. Bray stepped forward, 1 foot at a time. It didn't rush, didn't roar. It moved with quiet purpose. Daniel stood back, heart pounding. This was real now. No longer a plan, but a moment. They moved through the arena floor toward the east wall. That wall, Daniel remembered, was old and cracked from years of storms and heat. At the base was a tunnel opening, hidden behind a cart. Of broken spears, he pushed the cart aside while Bray waited behind him. Once the opening was clear, Bray lowered itself and crawled inside. Daniel followed quickly, the smoke capsule still in his hand. He turned back and lit one, tossing it toward the center of the arena. It burst open with a sharp hiss, releasing a thick white cloud. Then he threw the second, filling the space with smoke and confusion. Shouts rang out in the distance. Guards were returning inside the tunnel. The air was cold and damp. The path sloped downward, carved from rock and forgotten by time. Daniel's boots splashed in shallow puddles as they moved. Bray's large body barely fit, scraping against the walls, but it kept going, trusting Daniel's lead. They moved in silence for several minutes, only the sound of breathing and water. Then they reached a metal grate blocking the exit. Daniel cursed softly. It hadn't been on the map. He tried pulling at the bars, but they didn't move. Bray stepped forward and growled low, then slammed into the grate with its shoulder. Once, twice, then the metal cracked. One more hit, and the bars bent outward, enough space to crawl through. Daniel slipped out first and reached up to help guide Bray through. They were outside the arena now, in the wastelands beyond. The cold night air hit them like a wave. Above them, stars began to shine as the clouds slowly parted. Behind them, alarms rang out from the town, horns blowing and lights flaring. They would send trackers, hounds, maybe even drones. Daniel turned to Bray. "We have to keep moving." They ran across the dry earth, past rocks and broken fences. Daniel's legs burned with every step. Bray ran beside him, never once leaving his side. For something so big, it moved fast and silent, like it was born for nights like this. Hours passed and the lights of the town disappeared behind them. They stopped near a shallow canyon, resting under an outcropping of stone. Daniel collapsed. To the ground, breathing hard, Bray stood over him, watching. Then the beast did something Daniel didn't expect. It lay beside him, gently curling its body like a guard dog. Daniel looked up at the stars, chest rising and falling. "I didn't think we'd make it," he whispered. Bray made a soft, low sound in response. Daniel reached over and touched its shoulder. "You're free now," he said, smiling through exhaustion. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't over. Freedom was just the beginning. They would be hunted, tracked, and feared. But they would face it together, man and beast, no longer strangers but allies. And somewhere in the distance under the stars, a new kind of bond was growing, one not built on power or fear, but on choice. The morning sun rose over the canyon, casting gold light across the rocks. Dust shimmered in the air, carried by the wind like ash from an old fire. Daniel sat beside Bray, his back against the stone, blinking at the horizon. His legs ached, his throat was dry, but he was alive. And so was Bray. The beast rested quietly. Its large body stretched across the ground. Its wounds from the chains were healing slowly, though still raw. Daniel looked at them and whispered, "We need medicine, food, water." Bray didn't respond, but gave a soft nod. It understood, as always, without words. But peace never lasted long in places like this far behind them. The horns of the town still echoed faintly. They had discovered the escape by now. Daniel knew patrols would be sent soon. Mounted soldiers, drones, maybe dogs. He had to keep moving no matter how tired he felt. By midday they reached a dried-out riverbed. Daniel crouched and dug his fingers into the cracked earth. He found a patch of muddy water and scooped some into a torn bottle. He handed it to Bray, who drank slowly, carefully. Then Daniel drank too, ignoring the bitter taste. They traveled east, where the cliffs grew taller and the sun dipped behind. Clouds, Daniel remembered old maps from the trader tents. This land had caves, old tunnels, hidden places. He hoped they'd find one before nightfall. They needed cover, a place to hide, not just from weather, but from what was coming. By late afternoon, the sound of engines echoed in the sky. Daniel grabbed Bray's arm and pulled them into a shadowed ravine. Above them, 2 black drones zipped across the sky, scanning the ground with red lights. They moved in wide circles, slow but searching. Daniel held his breath, praying they'd pass without seeing them. Bray crouched low beside him, completely. Still, the lights passed over them once, then twice. then faded into the distance. Daniel finally exhaled, wiping sweat from his forehead. "They're getting close," he whispered. That night, they found shelter in a narrow cave hidden behind a curtain of vines. The opening was small, but inside it widened. Cool air flowed through it, and the sound of dripping water echoed off the walls. Daniel smiled for the first time in days. "This will work," he said, lighting a small fire from broken twigs. Bray lay down beside the fire, its eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Daniel unwrapped a piece of dry bread from his coat and split it in half. He gave one piece to Bray, who accepted it with quiet grace. They ate in silence, listening to the wind outside. It felt almost like peace again, but in the morning the peace shattered. Voices echoed across the canyon, sharp, loud, human voices. Daniel jumped to his feet and grabbed his bag. He peered through the vines and saw shadows moving through the rocks. Soldiers, maybe 6 of them, armed and alert. "They found us," he said, heart racing. Bray rose slowly, muscles tight, claws flexing. Daniel turned to the back of the cave. Another tunnel led deeper into the mountain. "We run," he said. "No fighting unless we have to." Bray nodded, and they moved. The tunnel was narrow and dark, but it sloped downward. Daniel stumbled once, scraping his knee on sharp stone. Behind them, footsteps entered the cave. Shouts followed, bouncing off the walls. "Go," Daniel hissed. "Don't stop." Bray moved ahead, guiding them through twists and turns. Then light appeared ahead, a second exit. They burst out into a forested valley, wild and green. Trees swayed in the wind, and the sound of birds filled the air. It was a new place, untouched. They didn't stop running until the sounds behind them faded. Daniel collapsed near a tree, gasping for air. Bray stood guard, watching the trail behind them with glowing eyes. "We lost them," Daniel panted, "for now." But both of them knew. More would come. That night they built a fire in a hollow tree trunk. Daniel wrapped his arms around himself, trying to get warm. Bray curled nearby, offering heat with its large body. The stars above were bright. Unbroken by smoke or noise, it should have felt peaceful, but it didn't. Daniel looked up and whispered, "They won't stop, will they?" Bray didn't answer, but its silence said enough. The hunters would come again and again, because they couldn't accept that something once called a monster could change. Could be something more. Daniel reached into his bag and pulled out the sketch pad again. He drew a mountain, a river, and 2 figures, one tall, one small, walking side by side. Bray leaned in to look, and this time, it let out a soft sound. Almost a laugh. Daniel smiled. "Yeah, we're not artists, but we're still writing our story. One drawing, one step at a time." In the distance, a new sound grew louder, a long, mechanical hum. Daniel stood and scanned the sky. A large drone hovered far away, flashing blue lights, scanning the horizon. He grabbed Bray's arm, voice steady. "We move at sunrise," and the beast gave a slow, strong nod, because now they weren't just running to survive, they were running toward something. A place where kindness was not a weakness, but a reason to keep going. The sun was just rising, painting the sky with soft orange and gold. Mist rolled across the valley floor, wrapping the trees like a quiet dream. Daniel and Bray moved carefully through the woods. They had traveled. All night, their bodies sore, their minds heavy, but they didn't stop. Each step took them farther from the arena, farther from the chains, the cage, and the screams. Yet Daniel knew freedom wasn't just about distance. It was about being seen, truly seen, not as a beast or a traitor, but as something more, as someone who made a choice. They reached a high ridge by mid-morning. From there, they could see the old communication tower, the last working tech outpost before the wildlands. If Daniel could send a signal, maybe someone outside the region would listen. Not the town, not the guards, but someone neutral, someone who could help. But it came with a risk. As they moved closer, Bray suddenly froze. Its ears twitched, and its eyes narrowed toward the trees behind them. Daniel followed its gaze and cursed under his breath. 6 riders on hoverbikes were weaving through the woods, fast and armed. "They followed us," Daniel whispered. There was no time to run. The ground was open near the tower. No cover. No caves. Bray looked at Daniel, and for a moment its eyes asked a question, fight or surrender, but Daniel shook his head. Not this time. They stepped into the clearing. Facing the tower head-on, Daniel held his hands high, shouting, "Stop! We don't want to fight." The bike slowed, forming a half-circle around them. Weapons rose, aimed not at Daniel, but at Bray. The leader stepped forward, helmet smooth. "And Black, you made a lot of people angry, human," he said coldly. Daniel nodded. "Maybe, but I saved a life." The man laughed once, sharp and humorless. "That thing isn't a life, it's a weapon." Daniel's voice cracked as he shouted back, "It's more human than any of you." Bray stood tall beside him, not moving, not growling. It didn't attack, though it could have. It didn't run, though it had every reason to. It simply stood, waiting for their choice. Daniel stepped in front of it, arms outstretched. "If you want to kill it, you'll have to go through me," he said. For a second, no one moved. Then the leader raised his weapon. Bray didn't flinch. Daniel didn't step aside. From the tower, a woman's voice shouted, "Enough." Everyone turned as a figure in silver armor stepped onto the platform. She had a high rank, maybe an observer from the outpost. Her voice echoed through a speaker, firm and clear. "Lower your weapons, all of you." The guards hesitated, then obeyed. The woman walked down the ramp slowly, stopping in front of Daniel and Bray. She studied the beast with calm, curious eyes. Bray met her gaze, silent but strong. Then she looked at Daniel. "Tell me why." Daniel's voice was soft but steady. "Because no one else would," he said. "Because I saw pain where others saw danger. Because I saw a soul where they saw a monster." The woman nodded slowly. She turned to her men. "Leave them." The leader looked shocked. "Ma'am, it's a beast." She cut him off. "It's thinking, breathing, and it made no move. To harm you." She looked at Bray again, then said, "If we kill everything we fear, we become the true monsters." She stepped back, giving Daniel and Bray space, then added, "There's a refugee valley past the ridge, unmapped, safe. Go there." Daniel's eyes widened. "You're letting us go?" The woman nodded. "We all make choices, human. Yours was kindness." She turned back to her troops. "Anyone who fires again without cause will face me." And with that, she walked away. Leaving silence behind, Daniel looked at Bray, his voice shaking. "We're free." Bray didn't hum this time. It roared, but not a roar of rage, not a sound of battle. It was a deep, powerful cry of relief, of release, of something ancient returning to the wind. They moved past the tower, into the hills beyond. Trees grew taller, flowers bloomed, birds sang again. Daniel carried nothing but a bag and a dream. Bray walked beside him, not as a beast in chains, but as a friend. At sunset, they reached the edge of the hidden valley. Green fields stretched out below. Farms, small homes, peaceful smoke rising from chimneys. People who didn't know the story of the cage or the arena. People who might listen. First, before judging, Daniel sat on a rock and pulled out his sketch pad. He drew a rough image of the day. Him and Bray standing before the tower. He handed it to Bray, who tapped it gently. Then they both looked at the stars as they appeared one by one. No horns, no weapons, no walls, only sky. Daniel smiled. Kindness brought us here. And Bray, resting beside him, let out a quiet sound, not a growl, not a warning, but something that sounded a lot like peace.